Alright guys, so this is going to be a troubleshooting guide slash walkthrough breakdown of the trunk pull down on the 77 through 79 DeVille's, other Cadillac models of this range, and GM models. So this particular span of years, GM and some of these models used a different trunk pull down setup than previous years in the past and years in the future. This particular setup is specific to this gen, and it's very, very common and problematic on these particular models for the trunk pull down to go down or go out. So this is just sort of my rundown. A lot of troubleshooting went into this, and I just thought it would be helpful because it's a really common problem to break down exactly what each of these parts are and how you can kind of troubleshoot this to see how to fix the issue of an inoperable trunk pull down. So I'll go through each part, just kind of explain what each does, and to the best of my knowledge at least, and realizing I'm not in any way trained in this, and then show you what I did to figure out which part was faulty, just to get you going maybe in your setup. It'll help you determine and figure out what you need to do next. So to begin with, sorry for the mess. There's a couple parts involved in this, and they're all sort of, if you're not familiar with how these work, it's a little overwhelming. Like I said, for this particular date range, year range, the actual components of the trunk pull down are kind of scattered. Normally it's a one piece in the years prior, or I'm sorry, the years after 79. And this generation is breaking down a little bit differently. So to begin with, you have this latch, right? So this latch is what hooks onto your lock mechanism on the trunk itself. It's probably pretty obvious to you what this does. It moves up and down along the cylinder when it's working correctly, and will basically catch the hook off of the actuator. And the actuator is up here. So the actuator, so this is what will hook onto that latch. And that latch will recognize, along with the switch, that it's hooked and start moving down once it's hooked with the trunk pull down. So how does it move down? This latch moves down because it has a transmission mounted underneath it. And this transmission basically moves the cylinder up and down. That's all it does. So one of these main pieces that can go bad, I haven't seen it that often or heard about it that often, is this piece. It's the transmission down here, connected to the latch. So really the transmission could technically go out, stop allowing this to move up and down, and you would have this stuck in one position, not responding. If you were to take this off, you would see down underneath here, there's a little hole, and depending on what position this cylinder is in, if it was all the way down, you would see the hole filled in with the bottom of the cylinder. And in this, since it's up right now, you would see kind of an empty hole in the bottom. It's really just a moving piece up and down. So this particular setup, the transmission is connected to the motor. How? Through this wire, this big kind of thick blue wire. I think it's usually this color on most of the models. This isn't really a standard type of wire. I took this off. You have to like kind of wiggle it off of this notch here on both sides, and it looks like a thick kind of metal piece that's hanging out from the wire. It really just sticks in there. There's no clip or anything other than this. So that's how that talks to the motor. So that's the transmission and the latch. The next piece that's involved in this, and this is the most common piece to go bad, and you can see, looks like something of mine is acting up, which is why I investigated this in the first place, is the trunk pull down switch. So what does this switch do? This switch is connected to the harness, which connects to the motor as well. This switch, as you can see, has a engaging, and if you, on this one it's faulty, but it has the ability to push up and down. So when this trunk up here, the switch feels that this has moved down and is leaning against this switch, it'll engage the trunk pull down to keep moving down until it reaches the bottom. So one thing I had a big problem was figuring out what these two little, let's see if I can get it to focus. These two pins are, these two middle pins right here. So what are these middle pins? I still am unsure. Originally I thought that they did something with the actual lock, the latch. What I'm thinking now is, and I haven't gotten a straight answer from this in all my questions on the various forums, is it actually contacts some part of the actuator once this moves down. So I guess that's some kind of connection there where it tells it when to stop and when it reaches that metal to metal connection. And then you have the ground for the switch. So the ground just kind of hooks onto the metal bracket over here for the actual housing. All right, so we got the transmission, the latch, the switch, the actual lock actuator up here. That's where it latches. So what's left? What's left is the motor. So the motor, if you follow the wiring, these will lead you to motor's location, which is behind the right tail light. So if you look over here, that's the tail light. And you'll pull back the cover. And this is where your motor for the trunk pull down is located. So what does the motor setup look like? The motor setup has this fusible link connected to the harnesses. So this is something you want to check probably first before you do any testing. Make sure this fuse is still good. I haven't had any problems with this fuse. I checked it. So that wasn't the culprit. So this cylinder is your actual motor. And this motor has two wires coming off of it. It's that purple wire and the ground black wire. So where does that go? Those two purple, you can ignore this red wire, that's my testing. Purple and black go to the harness located next to the motor. So this is all mounted onto one bracket behind the tail light. So you got two harnesses here. This particular harness, as you can see, leads out to wiring, which takes us back to the switch. That's the same, just one on each side. Sorry about that. And the harness on the left side, so that one, where I have my prong sticking out of, this one right here, is where the motor is plugged into. So you have the purple and black wires from the motor leading into this harness, and what I found is that this motor doesn't engage really properly unless this is plugged in. So when I brought the car from the previous owner, he told me that there was an issue with the trunk pull down. So I started diagnosing it, and what I realized after reading is that the motor is sitting back here. It's not connected to the other parts directly like the other generations. So when I found that out, I saw that this particular harness had been unplugged. And why did he do that? He did that because there was another issue besides the motor, and in order to get the latch to be stationary and operate as a manual trunk, he had to disconnect this harness. So the motor stopped operating. Okay, so how did I figure out what piece is wrong? Under consideration was the actual motor, the switch, which is usually the culprit, the latch, probably not, unless it needed some greasing, or the transmission for the latch, possible, or with something not engaging on this, but it did lock manually, so I didn't think that was it. So, with this troubleshooting, so what I did was, originally the harness over here I had no response, and the harness I found over here, that left side harness, was disconnected. Once I plugged that in, I was getting a response. This originally from the previous owner was in the all the way down position, so the trunk would actually close and engage, and we would just turn the key to manually unlock it. Once I plugged this harness back in with the trunk open, this started moving in the up position automatically. So I knew at that point that the motor was operational, at least to go up, and the transmission was operational to move this up. So that was my first troubleshooting step. The next, obviously, problem is where I am now is, how do I get this thing back down? What's the actual piece that's not causing the trunk pull down to work? So thinking it through, I tried to engage the switch by pushing this down, now that I knew the motor was working, right? So I would engage the switch by pushing this down, thinking that might cause this to start moving down. That alone didn't do anything, but I would sometimes hear that clicking sound, so I knew that it was trying to engage. You don't hear it now, but you heard it before. Then what I did is I stuck something up here to keep this locked in a lock position like this, thinking that maybe that's what would trigger it in combination with the switch. Because there is a trunk release connection there, so I thought maybe this needed to be engaged. Someone advised that on some of the forums, to keep that engaged as if it was locked. Tell this also that it needed to think it was closed. There we go. So this alone and this in combination with holding this down still did not move this into the down position. So at that point, I knew that this was semi-operational. Same with this. This is responding now, but not in the way it should be. But why? I thought maybe it had to do with the pins, possibly, the ground. So what I did next is I unplugged this. And just give me a second. All right, so I unplug this, and you'll see that sound, that tick sound, stops. So what does that do? This now is not really hooked up to anything, no power source, it's just grounded. This harness is where I was able to test. So you see there's a ground all the way on the far left side on this wire. And then there's 3 other wires that connect to this harness. Not really knowing which one does what, but reading from the forums, the far 2 over on this side are what engage in up and down on the latch. So I had to try and figure out, I took a test light connected it to the this far right side, and I heard a clicking sound, so I knew that that pin in the harness was good. I then moved it to the second from the right pin, and it gave me a lit light, so I knew that was also live. And the ground obviously is the ground. I think the pink must be the trunk release, some piece of that, or some other relay. So that I did for my testing. So I knew this harness was good. It was getting power. The harness wasn't bad. The wiring was good, which pointed me more in the likely direction that the switch is the actual culprit. Still, I needed some more confirmation, and not only that, I needed to get this latch back into the right position so I could close the trunk and actually drive the car. All right, so we're getting to the end now. Sorry for the long explanation. So how did I figure out and move this latch back into the right position manually without the need for this switch, just to actually eliminate everything else and really confirm that the switch is the culprit? So what I did is I got these test prongs just off of Amazon. It's like $6, $7. The other side is the same thing. And these test prongs will simulate essentially hot wire a connection to kind of eliminate where the fault may be. So someone had suggested on the forum that I ground the actual latch directly to the motor. So I did that, and I didn't get anything. But what I did do is I used these wires, right? So I knew that this harness was good. And this harness plugs into the switch. So I knew if I could engage this harness to think it was still connected to the switch from the motor, I could simulate, test to see if this responds. Because technically, it's just looking for a direction and a ground from the motor. So I just eliminated the switch and went directly to the harness. So what I did is I back pronged with these two wires on the other side into the harness on the motor. So again, you'll see into the harness, the black is going, my black wire is going into the black wire of the harness, and my red wire is going into the purple wire of the harness. So it touches right inside there. You can just, with those long pins, you can just stick it right into the harness and it makes contact. Okay. So then what you're going to do is, let me see if I can get this with one hand. Right? So you can take your, I got my ground, take that and stick it into the ground, corresponding ground, right into the harness in the corresponding ground slot. Okay. And then you got that connected, right? So then what you're going to do is you're going to take this red prong and you're going to work between the two far right pins, right? Depending on which direction you want to move this. So I'm going to go on the right pin. So the right side is down and the left side is up. So if you keep hitting the left side and you're all the way up, you'll get a spark. And if you hit the right side, you'll see it goes down And here you'll see it goes up until you reach the top. All right, so that should get you going to the position you need to until you can find the switch, and you're golden.